Life's better when your stuff is protected under our roof.
Step 1. Open Streamlabs desktop. In the bottom left corner, click the gear icon to open the settings menu. Step 2. Navigate to the Output tab and change the output mode to Advanced. This unlocks more options for customization. Step 3. Under the encoder settings, select your hardware encoder. If you have an NVIDIA GPU, choose NVENC New. For rate control, set it to CBR, constant bitrate. Step 4. Set the bitrate to 6000 if you're streaming at 1080p 60 FPS. This value depends on your upload speed, so adjust accordingly. Leave the keyframe interval at 0 so it automatically configures itself. Step 5. Now go to the Video tab. Make sure your base canvas resolution matches your monitor size. Step 6. Set the output scaled resolution to 1920 by 1080 to ensure your stream is outputting at full 1080p resolution.
You getting input, Anna? Test.
Right? Oh, November. They were November.
Oh my gosh.
See? Like everybody was like 10.
Yeah.
You guys are 10 too?
We're gonna be 10 in March. You guys are getting so old. Are you guys gonna be doing your vows? Are you gonna do a vow renewal? We're hopefully gonna go on a trip.
Yeah, they're going on an Alaska cruise.
So on
Alaska cruise? Corey, you cruise Alaska all the time.
no,
I'm not going on a
all of them do me.
So, Mom and Paul are
October
going on an Alaska
25th.
cruise for
I
what?
really don't think that your mom
6 weeks?
should go on an Alaska cruise because they don't like anything below 80.
That sounds crazy.
Yeah.
Send
It's
them
like
to
me
the
going to-
Sahara.
I'm going to the Sahara because I hate heat.
Palm Springs with that. Or the
It's like for what, 6 or 4 weeks?
Days, yeah.
Days.
6 weeks.
Ooh,
Deep pockets.
Someone
punched you rid of me.
So we'll put on October 25th. Sky and I are doing our vow renewals. I just kind of want to do like a tea party potluck and just keep it really simple, and we'll invite some family and friends and of course the entire church. Oh, yeah, keep it simple.
Where are you going to do it
And
here?
then we're gonna go, yeah, if we could,
Yeah,
or,
yeah, yeah.
or even your place.
Either or.
Well,
Huh?
October, you want to do it inside.
25th? Is that a Saturday?
Is that the weekend Justin's going to, and Jennifer's going to Spokane?
yeah.
Oh, are you guys
I
gonna be
knew
out
there
of
was
town?
something. It just came up. I don't know what they're doing.
We could do it the weekend before.
They're going to Spokane the 29th and 30th. But the kids have an event planned on the 25th.
What kids?
The church kids.
Oh, I
okay.
didn't have that on my.
It's on my calendar and they wouldn't be there if it wasn't so.
Oh,
No,
I know.
it's important, it's important. So
So
what
am I
about,
house sitting for you guys? Sorry, Wendy.
what about the 18th? Is that open?
There's nothing on the 18th on my calendar.
Okay, let's do the
My
18th.
brother's birthday is on the 19th though, but it doesn't matter.
It
Bray-
doesn't matter.
Brea's
we'll be in
birthday is
church
that week.
anyway.
Birthday is the 18th.
Yeah, Brea's birthday is that week.
Could we do a double celebration? That'd be, or like a Friday evening? Does it have to be a Saturday? Just, friends over and waffle and stuff.
I was listening to 1612 on the way over. It's got a rockin' groove.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got the
It's
tab
That's
for
it. I like the bass on it.
What
It's
about
guitar too.
November
Doubling up.
1st?
That's right. Yeah.
We could do November 1st, too. Whatever works easiest. Let's do November 1st. November 1st it is. Okay, I'll renewal.
That'll work. And it just so happens to coincide with the right thing.
Yay!
All right.
Everybody likes extra sleep.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Justin. I am sorry. Thank you for being patient with me.
No, that's all right.
Once again.
We usually don't start till 30 after anyway. Holly and Jeff are out of town, right? Out of state?
Yes.
All right. How's everybody this morning?
Real good.
Good. Give me just a second here. Where did I put my Bible? All right, is there a volunteer to open us up in prayer this morning? No one feels... Okay. Good to have you here, Wendy.
Good to be here. Heavenly Father, thank you for church family. Thank you for men taking the time to teach and women taking the time to teach. The young ones and also the rest of us who are still growing and learning in your word. There is so much and it'll never stop. May we all glean what we are supposed to get from Justin, and you're working through him today, and thank you for all the blessings in your name.
Amen. All right, so last weekend we started looking at the history of Rome. And if you're wondering why we're doing a brief overview of the history of Rome, a couple reasons. Want to get a understanding of how Rome would come to be integral in the influence of Christianity. Moving from a outlook on Christians or this movement as being, kind of nut jobs to essentially piggybacking and taking over the movement. And also how it influences the church, through some of the philosophies that came about, like Gnosticism, Stoicism, things like that. So last week we talked about the primary kind of forces at the time of Rome. So if you remember, Rome started out as a monarchy and then moved to a republic. And then from there, they went to a imperial kingdom, which is being ruled by an emperor. So we looked at the other forces that that Rome dealt with. The primary forces would have been Gaul. If you remember, Gaul was a Celtic tribe just to the east of Germany. West of Germany. And then the Germanic tribes were kind of Rome was never able to take over the German territory. And then there was the Parthians, which were essentially the Persians, or what we would call the Iranians today.
They were all the way up into Asia Minor, though, right?
Who's that?
The
The Parthians. Well, they made their way all the way over to Syria and Judea during Rome's time.
Well, I mean, Asia Minor is Ephesus.
Yeah. Yep. So, yeah, and we'll get into that, looking at some of the churches that are mentioned in Scripture, what was their, what kind of people potentially made up the churches, outside of, the dispersion of the Jews. We talked about Galatia briefly because, the the Gaelic tribes migrated over to Turkey, and that's what really established the Galatian churches. That's where the term comes from, Galatia. So they were a Celtic people who, pretty superstitious. They were pretty ruthless warriors, in their battles against Rome. They took advantage of the deep forests up there in that territory north of the Andes, or the Alps, sorry. And they would, after they'd slaughter or win battles, they would decapitate the soldiers and nail their heads to the trees and kind of put a bad omen in those forests that Romans were pretty superstitious too, so they were really hesitant to enter in to the forest there at the border of Germany. So let me pick up here. So yeah, we talked about the Germanic tribes really briefly, the Gauls, the Parthians, and then Egypt remained relatively independent, through bribery. They bribed Rome throughout their existence up until Octavian comes into the picture. So they were a very wealthy nation, through trade and agriculture. So that's where Rome got a lot of their. We're talking about 60 BC time frame, between 80 and 60 BC. So we'll pick up with Caesar, the first Caesar. So at the time of Caesar's kind of upstart, well, during that general time period, Alexandria was the capital of Egypt. So Caesar, which for some reason I'm blanking out on his actual name. It was Caesar. Tiberius? No. I got it right here. Why can't I remember it? Trajan. Gaius. Sorry. Gaius Caesar.
60.
So yeah, so Caesar kind of works his way up the political ladder through bribery. So he bribes a lot of senatorial holders and other governors. And so he essentially builds his resume through illegal means, and he comes to owe a lot of people a lot of money. So in order to avoid the Senate and those he owed money to, he became a general so that he could be sent out and, kind of avoid having to answer for his illegal actions and his debt. And, Romans were an agrarian people, but they were also warriors. The highest honor was to be a general and to lead a large-scale battle and win victory. They'd have triumphs in Rome where you'd come back, and parade yourself through Rome with all your spoils. And typically the stepping stone to becoming an emperor was to be a general and to win a major war. So Caesar seeks out to be a general. So he becomes general of several legions, and the Senate agrees to allow him to head to Gaul to expand the Roman territory. So Gaul, if you remember, Gaul is, So Gaul would be this area right here, starting north of the Alps, here, and goes up into here. So Caesar heads out and starts capturing Gallic territory. And so over time, Caesar realizes that the only way he's going to be able to return to Rome is if he's successful in Gaul. So he puts a large amount of effort in establishing a huge army. And in short, it could be said that Caesar's path to almost emperor, so he was never officially named emperor of Rome, but his path to become emperor was because he would have otherwise, had to stand trial and probably would have been executed for his illegal means of establishing his position. And the Senate was even enacting laws almost specifically aimed at Caesar because they saw his rising popularity. So in an attempt to, try him and convict him, they established some laws. So eventually, Caesar established what's called the First Triumvirate in 60 BC, and this was basically a three-way agreement between Caesar, Pompey, who was another major general for Rome, and Pompey's focus was primarily to the east, so he did quite a few battles with the Parthians. And then we have Marcus Crassus. So Marcus Crassus, actually I'll get to him. So this was an alliance formed to consolidate their political power and influence by bypassing the Senate in order to pass their own legislation and political appointments. So the establishment of this first triumvirate would start removing power from the Senate, basically make the Senate less important and have less influence. So this is really how Rome starts kind of, creeping towards a imperial style government. So in Rome, in order to move up the political ladder, as I mentioned, you had to win a major battle. So Crassus, the third person of this triumvirate, he was the wealthiest man in the world at this time. So I looked up his estimated net worth. That's historians state, and converting it to today's capital, he was worth $60 billion. So to give you an idea, Elon's worth 400, so he's getting up there, five times or a fifth of Elon's worth. Yeah, that's estimate worth. Richest man in the world that we know of.
Wasn't there that one guy? He was
I'll let you think on that. So to gain political strength, Crassus set out across the Euphrates in an attempt to conquer the Parthians. So Crassus, he went to battle just east of Syria, and he was defeated, captured, and killed. And if you ever watched Game of Thrones, there's a scene where they pour molten gold down the guy's throat. So when they got that idea from Crassus, so when he was killed, the Parthians poured molten gold down his throat and over his skull, and basically established, this is what happens when you come against the Parthians, and when you to mock his thirst of riches.
He was the wealthiest guy in the world.
Yeah. Yep. So he is a politician. So to gain that stepping stone towards a major political office, he sought battle with the Parthians. Parthians were pretty ruthless as well. So the Roman statesman Pompey and the Senate demanded that Caesar give up his provinces in Gaul and his armies and return to Rome. So this kind of stemmed from Pompey ended up marrying, I believe it was Caesar's daughter, and she died. And so Pompey and Caesar kind of had a falling out. And so Pompey, while Caesar is up in the Gallic region, Pompey's back in Rome, kind of working in the background with the Senate to try to remove Caesar. So instead, Caesar amassed a large army and marched them back to Rome in 49 BC, which was a huge no-no. You weren't allowed to bring legions within the territory of Rome. So this initiated a civil war on the Roman Senate and Pompey, and he marched his army into Italy. So the battle ensued between Caesar and Pompey until Pompey eventually fled to Egypt, where the dignitaries there in Egypt, in an attempt to gain favor with Caesar assassinated Pompey. So when in Caesar's pursuit of Pompey, and his pursuit of Pompey wasn't to kill him, he wanted to reestablish a friendship with Pompey and set him up as a kind of a co-ruler, or have his primary general. And so when in Caesar's pursuit of Pompey, when he pulled up into Egypt, they handed him Pompey's head, and Caesar basically flew off the handle. So at this time, Egypt was in a civil war between the Macedonians and the Egyptians. So when Caesar arrives, is handed his Pompey's head, he makes the decision. He's like, well, while I'm here, I may as well see if I can end the civil war. So he ends up defeating Ptolemy, who was the king at the time, or the leader. Ptolemy, huh? I think so. I'd have to look. I should have put that down. So he defeats Ptolemy, and then he installs his sister Cleopatra as pharaoh. And in so doing, he establishes a relationship with Cleopatra, and she ends up becoming his mistress. Cleopatra is going to be entering in Romans history off and on here for the next 60 or so years. So Caesar would set himself up as the consul, chief magistrate / dictator. So if you remember, during Rome's Republican phase, they would sometimes elect a dictator to basically act as what we would call our president, the executive branch. So he would lead all the major wars. So Caesar announces himself as dictator, and he sets himself up as dictator for like roughly 10 years, which typically the Senate would re-elect a new dictator every year, so they only held a year office. So this was unprecedented for Caesar to just basically say, "Sorry, I'm dictator for the next 10 years." So in 63 BC, Caesar set himself up also as the Pontifex Maximus, joining. So we're getting closer to the joining of church and state, although he's not officially announced as the emperor. So if you ever heard of the Ides of March, that is, so the Senate, because they were becoming less and less influential, devised the plan to have Caesar assassinated. So they organized a meeting with Caesar, saying it was for official duties, and when he went into the court, they all stabbed him. So they call that the Ides of March, because it was I believe it was in March. Makes sense.
Stabs of March.
That like 30 something times?
I don't know. It's all speculation. So after Caesar was murdered, a power vacuum existed in which the second triumvirate was established. So this is when Octavian, Augustus Caesar, who was the grandnephew of Caesar, Gaius Caesar, and adopted son. So, this is the starting point of when they start keeping kind of the emperors within the royal bloodline. So
Gaius was Julius Caesar?
yeah, they're both labeled Julius Caesar.
The next one, Octavia, is as well.
becomes Antony Julius Caesar, or not Antony, Augustus Julius Caesar.
So, what's the Julius? What's the significance of that?
I had that written down.
Is that more a title than it is
Yeah.
a name?
He opened a bunch of mall juice.
It's a franchise.
It's franchise.
It's
It was
a
court.
franchise name.
think it had something to do with, I'd have to look. If memory serves me, it has to do with not deity, but a lordship position.
Supreme.
Yeah.
Supreme Caesar. Not just the dictator, supreme dictator.
Yep. So this second triumvirate was established between Octavian, the adopted son of Caesar, who would, Octavian, as I mentioned, would later take up the name Augustus Caesar, and then Mark Antony and Lepidus. So Octavian got some fancy, digital representations.
That's the Pantheon. I got pictures of that.
Yep. Actually, so Octavian had a best friend that he grew up with who was like the super athlete and became a, super warrior. I think his name was Marcus Agrippa. And if it wasn't for him, Octavian wouldn't have become emperor, because he's the one that basically won all of Octavian's war. Octavian was a sickly person. He dealt with illness his whole life. And in fact, there was kind of a, backdoor joke about Octavian, because whenever he'd go out to battle, the day that they were to go out to battle, he would claim that he was ill and would stay behind. So Octavian ruled from 63 BC to 14 AD. So
Brown hair.
maybe it's common for Romans? I don't know.
It's not.
What was it, black Italians?
Yeah.
Just look at Paul.
Roman heritage is darker features.
Yeah.
Short. They were shorter.
So eventually in 36 BC, this triumvirate that was established was torn apart by competing ambitions. So Lepidus, the third person I mentioned in the triumvirate, was exiled. And then Antony, in an attempt to avert civil war between him and Octavian, married Octavian's sister, Octavia, but would later carry on a love affair with Cleopatra. So again, Cleopatra enters the picture. And Cleopatra would bore him 3 children. So Antony would establish Herod the Great, as the new Roman client king of Judea and the surrounding region in 38 BC. So Herod, if you remember, Herod had been labeled king of the Jews by the Roman Senate in 40 BC, but Parthia had pushed their way into the region of Judea and pushed out Rome for a brief period.
Was that the Herod that killed all those babies?
That was Herod Augustus. Herod, yeah, that's his son. That wasn't Herod the Great. Herod the Great was actually a pretty smart governor, but his son not so much.
He's the one that improved the temple. Herod.
Yep. Yeah. So the Parthians pushed out Rome. So upon Rome taking back Judea, Antony sets up Herod as governor. And then Antony would go on to battle against the Parthians south of Armenia, but he would lose some 40,000 soldiers. So, which was a huge shame as a commander. So shortly after, Octavian made moves back in Rome to remove Antony from his position. And Antony didn't return to Rome, but instead went to Alexandria, where he shacked up with Cleopatra and even named her Queen of Rome. And so you can imagine how that went over back in Rome.
Yeah.
Rome was starting to have, because during Caesar's time, the first Caesar, he actually brought Cleopatra into Rome and introduced her, kind of paraded her around. And then, upon Antony's relationship with Cleopatra, the Senate or the state started viewing Cleopatra as essentially an enemy of the state. So once once that happened, Octavian viewed Antony as an enemy of the state, having been persuaded by, he viewed Antony as being persuaded by the Easterners. And so in 32 BC, the Senate declared war against Cleopatra, and in 31 BC, Octavian fought against both Cleopatra and Antony. So once Octavian defeated Antony, where Antony saw his navy losing, so Cleopatra escaped back to Alexandria first. They actually brought a ship with them that had all of their wealth on the ship. So when Antony saw they were losing, he immediately, booked it over to their essentially barge of wealth and took it back to Alexandria, where someone told him that Cleopatra had killed herself. So he went and stabbed himself to commit suicide. And when actually Cleopatra had kind of holed herself up in this building, huh? Yeah. So upon her hearing that Antony stabbed himself, he wasn't quite dead yet, she ran to him, and he died in her arms, and then so then Octavian invades Egypt. They essentially starve, or no, sorry, they don't really know how Cleopatra died. The legend says that she used a specific kind of snake, a very venomous snake. Huh? I think it was, yeah. And basically committed suicide through poison, venom.
Oh.
Yeah.
I hate snakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
That's why a lot of imagery you see of her, she has a snake, snake wrapped around her.
Yeah, I don't want to be bit by a snake. Well, that's fine, but I don't want to be bit by a snake. I want that to be my last memory, my last experience in life.
So really, what's kind of working out is the person with the most ambition and the largest army is really, is the one that earns the right to rule Rome as the Senate loses their influence. So once Octavian defeats Antony, he annexed Egypt, so they actually become a part of Rome now. And eventually he returns to Rome, where he's made emperor in 27 BC. And then in 12 BC, he would establish himself as Pontifex Maximus, which was the chief high priest. And so this is marking the first time in Roman history where both the executive leader of Rome was also the religious leader, combining both the political and religious authority. So that's key, because that's going to come into play in the future here. So Octavian began implementing much of the Egyptian architecture, designs, and technologies, moving away from the brick buildings that they used to build. Huh? I don't.
Remember that part of the tour. Oh, it's not made out of stone. It would probably decay over time. So, yeah.
Much of what's built now, like the Colosseum, it was kind of influenced by Egyptian architecture and their technology.
They don't like to admit that.
I don't think they do.
It's not mentioned anywhere.
There's a lot of things that they don't admit to. They say they were the first democracy when in fact they got a lot of their keynotes from Greece or the Greeks.
Oh yeah, they're built on the foundation of Greece for sure.
Yeah. So Octavian died, natural causes, probably from his illness. So to take his place was Tiberius. What time is it? I'll do Tiberius. Where did I do? So Tiberius, kind of a funny story. Octavian I think he had 2 sons. And so, he figured his kind of next his successor was kind of in the books, and both of his sons died. I think one, if I remember right, one was to illness and one was during a battle. And so Tiberius was kind of, early on was kind of pushed off the side, wasn't really keyed in. He was Tiberius was, yeah, he was related to, he was a direct descendant of Caesar, the first Caesar. I think he was a nephew. I can't remember. There's so many kind of incestual relationships. So Tiberius, decides to remove himself kind of from the political scene and goes to, I think it was Sicily, or I can't remember, one of the islands. And yeah, maybe. And I think, then there's a certain point where he decides that, maybe I do have some political motivation. So he comes back, and then, after Octavian's sons die, in order to keep the ruling seat within the, Caesar's family, he names Tiberius as his adopted son. So Tiberius becomes emperor after Octavian's death. He rules from 14 CE to 37 CE, or AD, sorry, 14 AD to 37 AD. So Tiberius was pretty ruthless. There was an individual called Caligula, who will come into play here shortly, who was also a direct descendant of Caesar. Tiberius saw him as a potential threat to his position as emperor. So he had all of Caligula's, both Caligula's brothers killed and his father, and then had his mother exiled and starved to death. Then, to top it off, he forced Caligula to live with him, Tiberius, in order to kind of train him up as the next emperor. Because at this point, Caligulus was a young boy.
This is the fat Caligula, the icky one.
Mm-hmm.
All these guys are icky.
Yeah.
He's giving you the edited, clean version.
Yeah. So Tiberius would become largely paranoid of Rome, thinking all Rome was against him. So he would hold treason trials with no discrimination on age or gender. So anybody he felt like was against him, he would execute. He also became fond of young boys. And after he was done with them, he would cast them off a cliff. The death of Tiberius is speculated to have been either by poisoning or by smothering while he was ill. So just when you think it couldn't get any worse than Tiberius, enter in Caligulus. I'm out of time, so we'll pick up next week.
It's a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
I'll be like, you know what? I'm gonna be like, Sky, Justin's gonna cover Caligula. You've got to come to church, and he'll be like, yes. Joy. Oh, Nikki. I love it. Thanks, Sky.
Well,
Loves it.
and Caligula won't even be among the worst either.
Oh, I know.
So, all right. That's all I got. Any comments or questions?
Notice the date, right? Tiberius,
Yep.
death of Christ.
Yeah, so keep that in the back of your mind, when you're thinking about, like, when you consider the church at Rome.
So that would be 60s, 60 AD or CE for
Yeah.
the church at Rome. We're not there yet.
Not there yet, and then also consider the region of Judea as well.
So which Caesar was it that, washed their hands of?
It wasn't a
It wasn't a Caesar.
That was Pontius Pilate.
He was the governor of the region.
Yeah.
That was
We haven't got there yet. We haven't got to that yet. Yeah.